You know, there's this building in Paris, Notre-Dame, they call it, and it shouldn't exist. I mean that literally. In 1163, they started piling stones on an island in the Seine, one on top of another, going up and up, hollowing out the walls as they climbed. By all rights, the thing should have collapsed. The walls got thinner as they got taller. They cut enormous holes in them, holes 30, 40 feet across. And they filled those holes with glass. Glass, thousands of pounds of it, held together by nothing but lead and hope. And here's what gets me. It worked. For 850 years, it worked. Those walls didn't fall. That glass didn't shatter. Even when fire devoured the roof in 2019, even when the whole world watched the spire collapse in flames, the stone bones stood firm. The flying buttresses held, those skeletal arches reaching out like ribs. They held. The rose windows survived. So here's my question, and it's an honest one. How did a bunch of medieval stonemasons, working without calculators, without computers, without any of our fancy stress analysis, how did they build something that still defies gravity? And more than that, why does it move us the way it does? Look, before there was Notre-Dame, there was a problem. A practical problem. You've got this island, Île de la Cité. It sits right in the middle of the Seine, maybe 200 meters across at its widest point. And in 1160, this island is packed. I mean, shoulder to shoulder packed with people. Pilgrims coming through on their way to Santiago de Compostela, merchants, crusaders. The population of Paris is doubling every few decades, and there's this old Romanesque cathedral sitting there. Saint Etienne, they called it, crumbling to small, falling apart. So Bishop Maurice de Sully looks at this situation and makes a crazy decision. He says, we're going to knock down the old cathedral, completely recycle the stones, and we're going to build something unprecedented. Now, construction starts. We know this pretty precisely. March or April 1163. Pope Alexander III himself lays the cornerstone. King Louis VII is there watching. And here's what they're planning. A building 128 meters long. That's 420 feet. 1.5 football fields. Width, 48 meters. And they want to go up, way up, because remember, they can't expand outward. They're on an island. You're surrounded by water. The only direction to grow is vertical. But here's the thing, and this is what nobody seems to talk about. The old style of building, Romanesque architecture, it couldn't go that high. You try to build a Romanesque church more than 25 meters tall. And you need walls so thick the building crushes itself under its own weight. The stone at the bottom starts to deform, starts to crack. I've seen it. There are Romanesque churches all over Europe with cracks running up the walls like lightning bolts because the builders pushed too far. So you've got this constraint. You see, you need height. You've got no choice. You're on an island. But the technology everyone knows can't deliver height without massive, thick walls. And thick walls means small windows, which means a dark interior. Not very inspiring, is it? You're trying to build a cathedral, a place that's supposed to lift people's spirits, make them feel like they're in the presence of something divine, and you give them a dark cave. The foundation work alone. This is interesting. They had to dig down through layers of earlier buildings, Roman ruins, remnants of a Gallo-Roman temple to Jupiter. They're going down to bedrock, and this takes years. The choir, just the eastern end of the building, takes from 1163 to 1182. That's 19 years for one section. Then for bays of the nave, 1182 to 1190, the western facade with those three big portals. 1200 to 1225, the towers. The south tower, 1220 to 1240. The North Tower, 1235 to 1250. Each tower taking 15 to 20 years. Total construction time for the basic structure, 87 years. Think about that. You start as a young apprentice, cutting stones. You work your whole life, and when you die, the building still isn't finished. Your grandchildren will see it completed, if they're lucky. And when it's done, this thing can hold 6,000 people. 6,000? That's not a church. That's like a covered stadium. So, how do you build higher without building thicker? How do you make stone? Stone that weighs tons per cubic meter. How do you make it float? That's the question they had to answer. And somehow, they did. 20 years before Notre-Dame, someone had a crazy idea. A guy named Abbot Suger, at a church called St. Denis, just north of Paris. He's rebuilding this old basilica. It's the burial place of French kings, so it's important, symbolic. And he's obsessed with light. He believes, theologically, that light is divine. Lux nova, he calls it, new light. He writes these ecstatic descriptions. Light is the manifestation of God's grace. Windows are pathways for divine radiance. All this very mystical stuff. But he's got the same problem everyone's got. Romanesque walls are thick, windows are small, interiors are dark. So he starts experimenting. And between 1140 and 1144, he and his builders, we don't know their names, unfortunately. This is anonymous, workshop knowledge. They combined three things that had existed separately but had never been put together quite this way. First, the pointed arch. Now, you're familiar with a Roman arch, right? It's semicircular, beautiful, elegant, but there's a problem. When you load a semicircular arch, you put weight on top of it. A lot of that force pushes outward at the sides. Lateral thrust, we call it. It's trying to knock the walls over sideways. You've got to brace against that with massive walls or thick buttresses. But a pointed arch, to curves meeting at a point, the geometry is different. You can work this out with a pencil and paper if you want. More of the force goes straight down, less sideways. It's like, okay, imagine you're holding up a tent. If the tent pole is vertical, you're just supporting weight straight down. That's easy. But if the pole is tilted, now you're fighting a sideways push too. That's harder. The pointed arch is closer to the vertical pole. It's not perfect. You still get lateral thrust, but it's better. Second, the ribbed vault. Instead of a solid barrel of stone pressing down everywhere equally, you build a skeleton of ribs. Stone arcs that cross the ceiling. And you fill in between them with lighter material, thinner stone, or even brick. The weight flows along these ribs to specific points on the columns below. Think of it like this. You're holding a heavy blanket over your head. Solid blanket, distributed weight. Your arms get tired fast. But if the blanket has poles sewn into it at specific lines, and you're only holding the poles, same weight, totally different problem. You're channeling the force. Third, and this is the weird one, the flying buttress. Okay, so you've got these thin walls, and even with pointed arches, there's still outward thrust trying to bulge the walls. What do? You build an arch outside the building that pushes back. You're fighting outward force with outward structure. The buttress literally flies over the roof of the side aisle, lands on a pier planted in the ground far from the main wall. It's counterintuitive. You're adding weight. The buttress system is heavy. It's solid stone to solve a weight problem. But it works because you're moving the weight to where the ground can handle it. You're distributing the load. At St. Denis, Suger proves this can work. Thin walls. Huge windows. Light flooding in. It's revolutionary. So when construction starts at Notre-Dame in 1163, they're trying to scale this up. Bigger building, taller walls, more windows. But, and this is crucial, the original plans don't include flying buttresses. We know this because archaeological evidence shows the first buttresses weren't added until around 1180, after the walls started cracking. They were invented as a fix, a repair, not as part of the original design. The builders were learning in real time. They're not working from equations. They don't have equations. They're working from observation. We built this section. It cracked here. Okay, we need more support there. By the time you get to the choir, the eastern end, there are 14 flying buttresses, each one spanning 15 meters. That's 50 feet through the air, and these aren't tentative little arches. They're confident, elegant. Later ones, designed by a guy named Jean Ravy in the 14th century, they're even more daring. Single flight spans, no intermediate support, just one clean arc from pier to wall. The nave walls, they raised those in the 13th century, made them even taller to accommodate bigger windows. The clear story, that's the upper level of windows. It floods the interior with light, 35 meters up. That's 115 feet from the floor to the top of the vault. Stand inside and look up, and it's vertiginous. The stone seems to float. Now here's the question. You can build thin walls and hold them up with exterior arches. Fine. But you've got all these openings. What do you fill them with? Glass. You fill them with glass. But glass in a Gothic cathedral isn't just decoration, it's structure. The three great rose windows at Notre-Dame. West, north, south. Each one spans about 13 meters in diameter. That's over 40 feet across. Think about that. A circle of glass, 42 feet wide, set into a stone wall 35 meters above the ground. The glass itself, combined with the lead holding it together, weighs several tons. And a circular opening that size creates enormous stress concentration at the edges. The stone wants to crack radiating out from the circle. The solution is the tracery, that delicate-looking stone framework dividing the circle into smaller segments. All those petals and spokes radiating from the centre. They look ornamental, and they are beautiful, but they're doing heavy structural work. Each stone mullion was hand-carved to precise tolerances so the weight distributes equally around the circle. Let me give you some numbers. The West Rose, that's the one over the main entrance, completed around 1225, approximately 9.6 meters across. 24 spokes in 3 concentric circles. The North Rose, built around 1250 to 1260, that's the big one, 12.9 meters, 80 panels. And here's something remarkable. It retains most of its original 13th century glass. Most of it. That glass is 750 years old, and it's still there, still transmitting light. The South Rose, same size as the North, 84 panels in for concentric circles based on symbolic numbers. 4, 12, and 24. This one was commissioned by King Louis IX. You know him as Saint Louis, around 1260, combined. All the stained glass in the cathedral covers nearly 1,000 square meters. That's a quarter acre of glass suspended in stone 30, 40, 50 meters up. Now, how do you make coloured glass? This isn't modern glass making. They couldn't precisely control temperature or chemistry. They're working with wood fires, hand-mixed materials, empirical knowledge passed down master to apprentice. For blue, the famous Notre-Dame blue, they added cobalt oxide. But the cobalt came from specific mines, probably in Central Europe, and the quality varied batch to batch. That deep, saturated blue isn't a formula. It's the result of one particular source of cobalt-rich materials, probably from the same quarry source. You can't reproduce it exactly now because we don't know which mine it came from. For red, this is fascinating. There's a technical problem. You add copper oxide to make red glass, but if you add enough to get a true ruby color, the glass becomes opaque, to dark. No light gets through. So what do? They invented something called flashing. You take a bubble of clear glass, dip it into molten red glass, then blow it out into a sheet. You get a thin red layer on a clear base. Transparent ruby tones. Beautiful. And then, this is clever, they can abrade away parts of the red layer to create patterns, revealing the clear glass beneath to colours from one piece of glass. Yellow didn't come until later, early 14th century. Silver stain. Apply silver nitrate or silver sulfide to glass. Fire it, you get yellows ranging from pale lemon to deep orange. This transformed the palette available to glaziers. But here's what gets me. When sunlight passes through these windows, it doesn't just illuminate the interior. It transforms it. The north rose, facing north, so it's receiving indirect, softer light, creates this contemplative, cooler atmosphere with its blues and greens. The south rose, facing south, getting direct afternoon sun, explodes with warm reds and golds. This isn't accident. This is deliberate optical engineering based on the cathedral's orientation and the path of the sun. Now, 2019, the fire. Roof and spire destroyed. Temperatures inside reached extreme levels. I mean, we're talking about an inferno. Several hundred degrees Celsius, at least. Lead melts at 327 degrees. The lead holding the glass pieces together should have melted. The windows should have collapsed. They didn't. All 3 rows windows survived intact. Why? Partial answer. The stone tracery provided thermal mass, heat dissipation. The fire was concentrated in the wooden roof structure above, not in the stone walls, where the windows sit. But still, it's remarkable. It's a testament to how well those medieval builders understood material properties. They couldn't calculate thermal expansion coefficients, but they knew, somehow, that stone and glass could survive together. Medieval worshippers saw these windows as books of light, visual scripture for a population that couldn't read. But there's a deeper symbolic layer. The transformation of ordinary sunlight into coloured radiance was understood as an allegory for divine grace transforming human souls. Step into Notre-Dame on a sunny afternoon. I've done this. You should do it if you get the chance. You're bathed in light that seems to come from another world. It's not just beautiful. It's numinous. There's a reason people weep in there. So now we've got the skeleton. The stone structure held up by flying buttresses. We've got the skin, the glass that fills the openings. But here's what I don't understand yet. How did they plan this? How did they know how much weight each buttress needed to carry? How did they calculate the thickness of those ribs? They built Notre-Dame without a single equation. Not one. This bothers me. Actually, it violates everything I was trained to think about engineering. You want to build a structure. First thing you do is calculate the loads, the stresses, the moments. You run the numbers. You verify the design mathematically before you cut the first stone. These guys didn't have that option. They didn't have calculus. Newton and Leibniz are 500 years in the future. They didn't have algebra in any modern sense. They didn't even have Arabic numerals widely adopted until after 1200. They're doing arithmetic with Roman numerals. Try multiplying MXV by DCCLXXIII and tell me how long it takes. So what did they have? Geometric proportions. Not equations, but ratios. You see the golden ratio appearing throughout the cathedral. That's phi, about 1.618, not because they calculated it. They couldn't, but because they used geometric construction with compass and straight edge. The width of the nave relates to its height by certain ratios. The height of the arches relates to their span. These proportions came from tradition, from copying what worked at earlier churches, from workshop secrets passed master to apprentice. Physical models. We have evidence. They built wooden models at scale to test how forces would distribute. You can't calculate the stress in a ribbed vault if you don't have stress equations. But you can build a small one, load it with weights, and watch where it cracks. Empirical knowledge of materials. They knew stone. They knew how limestone from the Paris Basin, Lutetian limestone, from quarries that had been worked since Roman times. They knew how it behaved differently from granite, from sandstone. They knew that softer stone, lamboard, could be used indoors where it wouldn't weather, while harder stone was needed for exteriors. There's even a third type, liais, a fine-grained hard limestone, used for sculptures and columns. This knowledge wasn't written down. It was in the hands and eyes of quarrymen and masons who'd spent lifetimes working the material, and observation of failure. This is critical. Romanesque churches had been cracking and collapsing for generations. The builders at Notre-Dame could look at those failures and see patterns. Wall bulging outward, lateral thrust problem, cracks radiating from window corners, stress, concentration. They didn't have the vocabulary of engineering, but they had the evidence. The architects, the ones whose names we know, they come later. The first phase, 1163 to 1200, that's anonymous. Collective workshop knowledge. Then you get Jean de Chelles, working 1250 to 1267, who designed the north transept facade and its rose window. His signature achievement is the radical thinness of that north transept wall, made possible by refined buttress design. Pierre de Montreuil, 1267 to 1296, he completes the south transept, adds chapels. Designs some of the most elegant flying buttresses in the choir. He also worked on Sainte-Chapelle, Louis IX's private chapel nearby, ensuring stylistic continuity. Jean Revy, continuing the work. His flying buttresses at the choir, 14th century, those are the pinnacle of the form. Single flight spans of 15 meters. More daring and graceful than earlier versions. But here's what I find strange. We can model Notre-Dame on a computer now. Finite element analysis. We can run simulations showing exactly how forces flow through the buttresses, through the ribs, down to the foundations. And you know what? The numbers work out. The medieval builders got it right. Got it right enough that the building stood for 850 years. They couldn't have done those calculations. The math didn't exist yet. So either they were incredibly lucky, and I don't believe in that much luck, or they understood something about structural behaviour that we've half forgotten. Something that came from working the material with their hands, day after day, year after year. I don't know which. I honestly don't. What I do know is this. In 1793, they tried to destroy it. In 1793, the French Revolution wasn't just overthrowing a government. It was trying to erase a worldview. And Notre-Dame represented everything they wanted gone: monarchy, the Catholic Church, the old feudal order where peasants starved while bishops lived in palaces. So they came after it, systematically. First, they desecrated it, converted it to a temple of reason. Imagine that. A temple to rationality in a Gothic cathedral. Then they used it as a warehouse for storing food. The sacred space where kings had been crowned became a grain depot. The gallery of kings on the western facade. 28 statues representing the kings of Judah, biblical ancestors of Christ. The revolutionaries thought these were French kings. They were wrong. These were biblical figures. But the symbolic violence was intentional. They went at them with sledgehammers, knocked the heads off. 28 stone heads, centuries of craftsmanship, gone. Those heads were lost for nearly 200 years, by the way. Discovered in 1977 during construction work in a Paris basement. Someone had hidden them, preserved them. They're in a museum now. Religious imagery destroyed. Statues of saints, angels, biblical scenes carved into the portals, smashed or defaced. Much of the original sculpture gone in months. The treasures looted. The crown of thorns. Supposedly the actual crown worn by Jesus during the crucifixion, brought to Paris in 1239 by Louis IX, moved out. Gold and silver liturgical objects melted down for bullion. The bells nearly melted too. The great bells of the towers, which had rung for births, deaths, wars, celebrations, they wanted to cast them into cannons. Several survived only because the revolutionaries ran out of time or resources. But here's what's interesting from an architectural standpoint. They didn't try to demolish the building. It's too massive. It sits on a strategic island. And frankly, I think they realized they couldn't. You'd need to dismantle it stone by stone, and each stone weighs hundreds of pounds. The whole structure is locked together. Keystones holding arches, buttresses bracing walls. Pull one stone, the structure compensates. This thing was designed to stand. So they gutted it instead, removed furnishings, left it exposed to weather. By 1802, when Napoleon returned the building to the church, it was a shell, structurally sound. Those buttresses and ribs held, but spiritually stripped. Napoleon crowns himself there in 1804. Think about the irony. A man who styled himself emperor, crowning himself in a building revolutionaries had tried to desacralize. The ceremony was hastily staged. The cathedral was in poor condition. They had to cover the damage with temporary decorations. Then decades of neglect, no major repairs. The western facade crumbling, statuary weathering, eroding. Stained glass, windows leaking. By the 1820s, serious voices were calling for the building to be torn down, too expensive to maintain, they said. À de crepis reliques. Then, in 1831, Victor Hugo publishes a novel, Notre-Dame de Paris. You know it in English as The Hunchback of Notre-Dame. It's a romantic melodrama. Quasimodo, Esmeralda, all that. But Hugo made the cathedral a character. He wrote passionate passages describing its architecture, lamenting its decay, blaming his own generation for neglect. The novel was a sensation. It changed public opinion. Suddenly, Notre-Dame wasn't just an old church. It was a symbol of France's medieval glory, a monument worth saving. Why did a work of fiction succeed where architectural treatises failed? Why did people care more about Notre-Dame after reading a tragic love story than when experts told them it was historically important? Because Hugo made it emotional. He tied the cathedral to identity. French identity, Parisian identity. He made people feel that losing Notre-Dame would be losing a part of themselves. So by the 1840s, public opinion has shifted. The building is still a wreck, but now people care. The government decides to restore it, and they hire Viollet-le-Duc. Now, here's where it gets complicated. The Notre-Dame you've seen in photographs, that iconic silhouette with the spire, the gargoyles, the pristine stonework, that's not medieval. It's 19th century. Viollet-le-Duc wins the restoration competition in 1844, along with Jean-Baptiste Lassus, and he has a philosophy. He writes it down, actually, so we can quote him. He wants to restore the cathedral to a state of completeness. that may never have existed at any given time. Read that again. He's not trying to reproduce the medieval cathedral exactly as it was in 1250. He's trying to realize what he imagines the medieval builders would have wanted if they'd had more time, money, and skill. That's radical. That's not restoration in any strict sense. That's interpretation, reinvention. What does he actually do? Says Fier. The original medieval spire, 13th century, was removed in the 18th century because it had become unstable. Viollet-le-Duc designs a replacement, 1859 to 1860, 96 meters tall. That's 315 feet. Made of oak covered in lead, weighing approximately 750 tons, taller and more ornate than the original. It becomes the iconic silhouette of Notre-Dame for 160 years, until April 15th, 2019, when the world watches it collapse in flames. The Gallery of Kings. The revolutionaries decapitated those statues. Viollet-le-Duc recreates them based on fragments and descriptions, but they're 19th century copies, not medieval originals, the chimeras and gargoyles. Those famous, grotesque creatures perched on the buttresses and balustrades. Many are Viollet-le-Duc's inventions. Medieval cathedrals did have gargoyles. Functional ones. They're the endpoints of the drainage system, projecting rainwater away from the walls. But Viollet-le-Duc added purely decorative chimeras. Fantastical hybrids that had no medieval precedent at Notre-Dame. He was inspired by gargoyles at other cathedrals, by medieval manuscripts, but he was creating medieval-style art, not restoring medieval art. Structural repairs. This is where he did essential, respectful work. Replaced damaged stones using limestone from the same quarries when possible. Reinforced the flying buttresses. Cleaned centuries of grime. Stabilized the north tower, which had been sinking slightly due to foundation settlement. The roof framework. Rebuilt the wooden structure, tiforet for la forêt, of oak beams, some dating back to the 13th century. 1,300 oak trees worth of timber. That's what burned in 2019 irreplaceable. Critics accused him of vandalism dressed up as restoration. He imposed his own vision. He changed details. He added elements that never existed. Defenders argued he saved the building from collapse and gave it new life. So here's the question, what's the original building? Is it the stone laid in 1163? The building as it stood in 1250? The building after the Revolution? The building Viollet-le-Duc completed in 1864? Or the building that burned in 2019? Ship of Theseus problem. You replace every plank of a ship. Is it still the same ship? By the 21st century, Notre-Dame was a composite. Some stones from the 12th century, some from the 13th, some from the 18th, many from the 19th, some from the 20th. The lead roof was 19th century. The organ was a hybrid. Pipes from the 15th century, some from the 18th, the case from the 18th. The north rose retained much original 13th century glass. The west and south roses had been restored multiple times. What Viollet-le-Duc got right, he understood that buildings evolve. They're used, they're adapted. His restorations were documented, published drawings and descriptions. So future scholars would know what was original and what wasn't, and critically, the buildings stood. His structural interventions worked. The cathedral served as church, tourist destination, cultural monument for another 150 years. Then, on a Monday afternoon in April 2019, it caught fire. I watched it burn on a screen like everyone else. And I kept thinking, this shouldn't be happening. Let me walk you through the timeline. We've reconstructed this from official reports, eyewitness accounts, video footage. April 15th, 2019, approximately 6:20 p.m. local time. Fire detected in the roof space, likely in the attic above the central nave. The exact ignition point, we think it's near the base of the spire, possibly related to electrical equipment or welding work from the ongoing restoration. The cathedral had been under scaffolding for spire repairs. 6:43 p.m. First alarm. Cathedral staff investigate, but they can't locate the fire initially. The attic is a labyrinth of timber beams, some over 100 meters long, accessible only by narrow staircases. Smoke-filled. Confusing. 6:51 p.m. Second alarm. Fire confirmed. Paris Fire Brigade notified. Now the fire spreads. Those oak beams. La Forat, they're tinder dry. They've been drying for 800 years. They're incredibly dense. When they ignite, they burn hot. Temperatures in the attic reach an estimated 800 to 1,000 degrees Celsius. That's 1,470 to 1,830 Fahrenheit. The lead roof covering. 210 tons of lead starts to melt. Lead melts at 327 degrees. It's dripping down the exterior like candle wax, pooling in gutters, solidifying in grotesque shapes. Toxic, by the way, lead dust contaminated parts of Paris. 7:50 p.m. approximately. The spire collapses. This is the image the world saw. 96 meters of iron and oak, its lead covering melting, tilting, then falling straight down through the roof into the nave below. 750 tons, dropped from 90 meters up. It doesn't punch through the stone vaulting. The Gothic ribbed vaults hold, even with molten lead and burning timber raining down on them. Throughout the evening, fire spreads along the roof beams. By midnight, it's under control, though not fully extinguished. The main structure stands, both bell towers intact. Stone walls intact, all 3 rows windows intact, the facade intact. But the roof is gone. Just the stone vaults exposed to the sky, blackened and cracked in places but not collapsed. Why did the building survive? Structural redundancy. Those flying buttresses, which look delicate, are massively over-designed. When the spire fell and the roof burned, redistributing weight suddenly and unevenly, the stone skeleton adapted. Multiple load paths. The buttresses that had held the roof's lateral thrust for 800 years shifted to carrying different loads. And they did it without cracking catastrophically. Material properties of Lutetia limestone. Stone doesn't burn. It can crack from thermal shock, and it does calcinate at high temperatures, but it doesn't combust. The vaults, though exposed to extreme heat, were thick enough that the interior surfaces didn't reach critical temperatures. The firefighters' strategy. By 9 p.m., they realized, trying to extinguish the fire directly. Spraying water into an inferno 60 meters above ground was futile and might cause more damage. Thermal shock to hot stone. Added weight of water pooling on vaults. So they focused on preventing spread to the towers. If the wooden bell frames in the towers ignited, the towers might collapse. Firefighters stationed themselves inside the towers. Incredibly dangerous. Smoke-filled, no visibility, risk of collapse. And they hosed down the bell frames. It worked. The towers were saved. But several sections of stone vaulting developed cracks or small holes. At 3 points, burning debris fell through into the nave. If a large section of vault had collapsed, the domino effect could have been catastrophic. Loss of load-bearing structure leading to wall failure, leading to total collapse. Some structural engineers who examined the damage estimated the cathedral was within 15 to 30. Minutes of catastrophic failure when the fire was brought under control. Artifacts that survived: the crown of thorns, carried out by a chaplain. The grand organ with 8,000 pipes, covered in soot but structurally intact. Paintings and sculptures, many removed before the fire, others surviving because they were stone. Around the world, people wept watching the fire. Why? It's a building. No one died, but symbols matter. Notre-Dame is woven into cultural memory. French, global, Victor Hugo's novel, Disney's film, every tourist photograph. The building represents continuity with the past, the idea that some things endure. Watching it burn felt like watching history collapse. President Macron standing in front of the smouldering cathedral the next morning. We will rebuild Notre-Dame even more beautifully. And I want it to be completed in 5 years. 5 years. For a building that took 87 years the first time. How? Rebuilding Notre-Dame isn't an engineering problem. It's a philosophy problem disguised as engineering. Within days of the fire, architects and designers worldwide submitted unsolicited proposals. A spire made of carbon fibre and gold leaf. A roof of stained glass, transparent, allowing light to flood the nave. A rooftop garden. A literal beam of light projecting upward from where the spire fell. Some proposals suggested leaving the cathedral as a ruin, a monument to fragility. Public opinion. There's polling data on this. Poll in La Figaro. May 2019, 55% of French respondents wanted the spire rebuilt exactly as Viollet-le-Duc designed it, identical to what burned. Strong opposition to contemporary interventions. Fears that modernizing would erase historical character. The government passed a law requiring that restoration preserve the historic, artistic and architectural interest of the monument. Vague phrase. Satisfied no one. Early 2024, Macron suggested replacing some of Viollet-le-Duc's 19th century stained glass with contemporary designs. Backlash was fierce. 140,000 people signed a petition. The French Commission on Architectural Monuments rejected it in July 2024. Decision: rebuild the spire as an exact replica. Same materials. Same methods, oak and lead. Traditional carpentry, no metal fasteners. Practical challenges: oak. The roof framework required 1,300 oak trees. Massive, centuries-old oaks from French forests. These don't exist in unlimited supply. Foresters donated trees from across France, but each beam had to be cut and shaped by hand using medieval techniques. Mortise and tenon joints cut with chisels and adzes. There are fewer than 100 artisans in France qualified to do this work. Lead, 210 tons, for the roof covering. Health and environmental concerns. Lead is toxic. During the fire, lead dust contaminated parts of Paris. Some argued for alternative materials. Copper, titanium. Decision: use lead with strict safety protocols. Stone, damaged vaulting needed repair or replacement. Finding Lutetia limestone from the original quarries, many closed in the 20th century, was difficult. Modern stonecutters had to match texture, density, colour of 800-year-old stone. Timeline: Macron's 5-year deadline was absurd. The cathedral didn't fully reopen until December 8, 2024. 5.5 years. Still astonishing. Comparable restorations take 10 to 20 years. Cost over €700 million, about $67 million. Funded by donations. French billionaires pledged €100 to 200 million each within days. Now, here's my take on the authentic versus innovative debate. The cathedral has been rebuilt and altered continuously for 850 years. The spire that burned was 160 years old, not medieval, The chimeras are 19th century. Some glass is 13th century, some 18th, some 20th. The building is already a ship of Theseus, demanding that the reconstruction be authentic to some imagined original state is. Well, it's understandable emotionally, but it's not historically coherent. But, and this is the counter-argument, people don't want a museum diorama. They want Notre-Dame. And Notre-Dame means the building as they've known it. The silhouette with the spire, the rose windows catching light, the gargoyles. You could build a more structurally rational cathedral using modern materials and techniques, but it wouldn't be Notre-Dame. It'd be something else. Why do we care so much about rebuilding it exactly as it was? We don't rebuild our houses the same way after they burn down. We improve them. But for a cathedral, for this cathedral, improvement feels like violation. Why? Partial answer. Notre-Dame is a link to the past, to people who are dead, to cultures that no longer exist. Changing it feels like severing that link. It's not rational, exactly, but it's deeply human. We want to believe some things endure. As of December 2024, they've done it. The cathedral is open. The spire stands. The roof is whole. You can walk inside and see light pouring through those rose windows again. So now the question is, what does this building mean? Why does it matter that it survived? When you walk into Notre-Dame, you're not just entering a building. You're entering the 12th century. Let me describe what it feels like. You enter through the western portal. Immediately, the scale overwhelms. The nave stretches ahead 128 meters, more than a football field. The ceiling vaults rise 35 meters above you. Vertical lines everywhere. Columns pulling your gaze upward, ribs converging at keystones high overhead. The effect is deliberate. You're meant to feel small, not crushed, but humbled. Medieval architects called this elevation of the spirit. The stone is cold, even in summer. It holds temperature, thermal mass. So the interior stays cool, dim, regardless of outside heat. Your footsteps echo. Sound behaves strangely. Voices from across the nave seem close. Whispers carry, yet loud sounds don't reverberate harshly. This is acoustic engineering, probably accidental, but it works. Choirs sound ethereal. Organ music seems to come from everywhere at once. Light. This is the key. On a sunny afternoon, the rose windows transform the interior. Shafts of coloured light. Blue from the north rose, red gold from the south. They cut through dimness like solid objects. You can see dust motes drifting in the beams. The light moves as the sun moves. What's illuminated at 2 p.m. is shadowed by 4 p.m. The building breathes with the day. Historical layers, visible if you know what to look for. Stones in the lower walls, near the foundation. 12th century, darker, more weathered. Rose windows. 13th century glass mixed with 19th and 20th century restorations. Chapels along the sides, added 13th to 14th centuries, each with its own patron, its own style. The organ case, 18th century, Louis XV era, ornate, gilded. Modern electrical lighting, 20th century, discreetly installed. You're standing in a building where people have stood for 850 years. Pilgrims, kings, revolutionaries, tourists, mourners. Every footstep you take treads on stone that medieval masons cut and placed, that Napoleon walked on, that survived fire and revolution. It's the same stone. Thought experiment. Suppose you could bring one of those 12th century masons forward in time and show him Notre-Dame today. What would he recognize? The stone skeleton? Yes. The flying buttresses? Yes, though he'd be amazed they're exposed now. The rose windows. Yes, though he'd noticed the glass is different, colours not quite the same. The interior, partly. He'd missed the rude screen, destroyed in the 18th century. The original painted surfaces, mostly whitewashed or cleaned away. The clutter of medieval worship. Reliquaries, side altars, candles everywhere, but the space itself, the proportions, the way light falls. He'd recognise that it's fundamentally the same building. Most buildings from the 12th century are gone, destroyed in wars, torn down, collapsed from neglect. Of major Gothic cathedrals in France, only a handful survive in anything like original form: Notre-Dame, Chartres, Reims, Amiens. And even these have been altered, restored, bombed. Reims was heavily damaged in World War I, rebuilt. Notre-Dame is one of the last physical connections to the medieval world. Not a reproduction, not a museum diorama, but the actual structure that actual people built with their hands 850 years ago. Stand in the nave, and you're occupying the same coordinates in space that a peasant pilgrim occupied in 1200, that a bishop occupied during the 100 Years' War, that a sans-culotte occupied during the Revolution, that a Nazi soldier occupied in 1940. Paris was occupied. The cathedral became a symbol of French resilience. Same stones, same light. I don't know why this moves me. It shouldn't. Stone is stone. Molecules don't care how old they are. But standing there, looking up at those vaults, I felt connected to everyone who'd stood there before. To the people who built it, who died centuries before I was born, but whose work I could touch. It's not rational, but it's real. So the building survived. It was rebuilt. People can visit, can feel that connection to the past. But there's something else I don't fully understand. Why do we need cathedrals at all? I've told you how Notre-Dame was built. I haven't told you why. And I'm not sure anyone can. Notre-Dame took 87 years to build, multiple generations of workers. Stonemasons, carpenters, glaziers, sculptors, labourers. The cost was staggering. Tithes, donations, church wealth, royal patronage. For comparison, building a castle took 10 to 20 years, practical structure for defence. Building a city wall took decades but had obvious utility. Survival. A cathedral? It serves one function, a space for worship. You could worship in a barn. You could worship in a small stone chapel, which many communities did. Why build something that seats 6,000 people, with walls 35 metres high, with glass that costs a fortune, with flying buttresses that serve no purpose except to enable thinner walls for more glass? From a purely economic standpoint, cathedrals make no sense. The resources could have gone to agriculture, infrastructure, housing. Yet across medieval Europe, France, England, Germany, Spain, cities competed to build the tallest, most elaborate cathedrals. Why? The religious explanation. Medieval. Christians believed the cathedral was a model of heaven on earth, the Bible describes. The heavenly Jerusalem as a city of light, with walls of jasper and streets of gold. The cathedral, with its soaring height, its luminous windows. Its proportions, based on sacred geometry, was meant to give worshippers a glimpse of paradise. For a peasant, illiterate, living in a wooden hut, working fields dawn to dusk, entering Notre-Dame would have been transformative. Nothing in their daily life approached this scale, this beauty. The coloured light, the vastness, the organ music. It was transcendent. That experience, the church argued, was worth the cost. The social explanation. Cathedrals were civic projects, symbols of a city's power and wealth. Paris, in the 12th century, was rising as a political and cultural centre. Building the largest cathedral in France was a statement. We are important, we matter, God favours us. Competition drove innovation. Cathedrals also employed thousands. Quarries, workshops, guilds. Entire industries existed to supply cathedral construction. Building a cathedral redistributed wealth, created jobs, sustained communities. Not efficient, but not entirely irrational. The aesthetic explanation, maybe the purpose of a cathedral is beauty itself. Not beauty for its own sake, but beauty as a form of knowledge. The medieval mind saw the world as ordered, created by a rational God whose nature could be glimpsed in the patterns of creation. The cathedral, with its mathematical proportions, its harmony of stone and light, was a physical argument. The universe is beautiful. Therefore the universe has meaning. Abbot Suger, at St. Denis, wrote that the material world is a ladder to the divine. Coloured glass, gold, jewels, music. These aren't distractions from God. They're paths toward God. The cathedral doesn't just represent heaven. It participates in heaven. It makes the invisible visible. But I've been in Notre-Dame, and I'm not a believer, and it still moves me. The light through the rose windows, the way the vaults seem to float. It's profound, even if I don't interpret it as divine. So maybe the purpose isn't specifically religious. Maybe it's something more fundamental. Human beings need to create things that outlast them. We need to make something that says, we were here, we mattered. I can explain the physics of why the buttresses hold up the walls. I can explain the chemistry of how they made the coloured glass. I can explain the history of how the cathedral survived fire and revolution. But I can't explain why standing in that space makes me feel awe. Not fear, not exactly reverence, but a sense that I'm in the presence of something larger than myself. And that feeling isn't unique to me. People have felt it for 850 years. Atheists, agnostics, believers, all report the same thing. The building does something to you. Is that the architecture? The scale? The proportions? The light? Are they triggering some neurological response? Some evolved reaction to vast spaces or certain visual patterns? Or is it cultural? We've been told cathedrals are important, sacred, so we feel what we've been primed to feel. Or is there something else? Something we don't have instruments to measure? I don't know, and maybe that's okay. Maybe the mystery is part of the point. Notre-Dame isn't just one building. It's a template. Within decades of Notre-Dame's construction, flying buttresses appeared at cathedrals across France. Chartres, rebuilt 1194 to 1220 after a fire, took Notre-Dame's buttress design and refined it. Chartres is often considered the purest example of high Gothic architecture. Reims, begun 1211, the coronation church of French kings. Architects pushed buttresses further, creating a lighter, more vertical interior. Amiens, begun 1220, designed by Robert de Luziches. The tallest nave of any completed medieval cathedral, 42.3 metres. Versus Notre-Dame's 35. This was only possible because Amiens architects had studied Notre-Dame's buttresses and improved on them. Sainte-Chapelle, 1241 to 1248, Louis IX's private chapel. The walls are almost entirely glass. 15 metres tall, held up by thin stone mullions and external buttressing. It's the logical extreme of Gothic principles, light without mass. The spread beyond France, England, Canterbury, Westminster, York, English Gothic developed its own style. More emphasis on length and horizontal lines, less on height. But the core technologies came from France, Germany, Cologne Cathedral, begun 1248, directly inspired by Amiens and Notre-Dame. Construction took 632 years, completed in 1880, but the design was pure 13th century Gothic. Spain-Leon Cathedral, Burgos Cathedral. Both echo the French Gothic model. Why Notre-Dame specifically mattered? It wasn't the first Gothic cathedral. St. Denis was. It wasn't the tallest. Amiens, it wasn't the most refined. Chartres, but it was influential because location. Paris was the intellectual and political centre of medieval Europe. Everyone passed through. Notre-Dame was visible, famous, copied, innovation. The flying buttresses were daring. Architects from across Europe came to study them. Documentation. Contemporary chroniclers described its construction, helping later builders understand the techniques. Gothic principles influenced beyond cathedrals. Universities. Oxford and Cambridge adopted Gothic architecture, creating collegiate Gothic that spread to American universities. Yale, Princeton. Civic buildings, town halls, guild halls. The Gothic revival. 19th century, Viollet-le-Duc was part of a broader movement. Architects like Augustus Pugin in England, Richard Upjohn in America revived Gothic forms, arguing they were morally superior to classical styles. Result: thousands of Gothic churches, government buildings, train stations. Here's the paradox. Gothic architecture solved a specific problem. How to build tall stone buildings with thin walls and large windows. That problem is obsolete. We have steel frames, reinforced concrete, glass curtain walls. We can build skyscrapers that make Notre-Dame look tiny. So why do we still build in Gothic style? Why do new churches, universities, even some houses, copy the pointed arches, the ribbed vaults, the vertical emphasis? Because Gothic isn't just a technology, it's a language. The forms communicate something. Permanence, aspiration, connection to the past. That modern materials can't replicate on their own. You can build a steel-framed church structurally superior to Notre-Dame. But if you want it to feel like a church, to evoke the same awe, you use pointed arches and rose windows. It's a cultural grammar, not just an engineering solution. Estimating conservatively, there are over 500 Gothic cathedrals in Europe, thousands of Gothic churches. Notre-Dame didn't cause all of them, but it set a standard. When you walk into a Gothic cathedral anywhere, Durham, Milan, Prague, you're walking into a building shaped by ideas that were tested and proven at Notre-Dame. So Notre-Dame changed architecture. It gave us flying buttresses, rose windows, a model for building up instead of out. But there's one more thing, one more mystery. Why does this building matter more than the people who built it? Of the thousands of people who worked on Notre-Dame between 1163 and 1250, we know perhaps a dozen names. Maurice de Sullerin, Jean de Chelles, Pierre de Montreuil, Pierre de Chelles, Jean Ravy, a few others. But the majority? Unknown, unnamed. Their wages weren't recorded. Their families weren't documented. They left no written records. Most were illiterate. What we know comes from inference, pay records from other cathedrals, guild regulations, the physical evidence of the building itself, tool marks on stones, techniques that reveal skill levels, working conditions reconstructed from evidence. Masons worked year-round, weather permitting. Stone can't be cut in freezing temperatures. It shatters. So winter was for planning, preparing materials, maintaining tools. Accidents were common. Falls from scaffolding, crushed limbs from falling stones, lung disease from stone dust. Silicosis, though they didn't have a name for it. Life expectancy for a manual labourer, 30 to 40 years. Pay was modest but steady. Masons were skilled workers, paid more than agricultural labourers, less than merchants or clerics. A master mason might earn enough to support a family, own a house. The work was communal. Guilds controlled who could work, maintained standards, provided a social safety net. Why did they do it? We can't know their motivations. They left no diaries, no letters. But we can infer economic necessity. It was a job. It paid. Better than subsistence farming, pride of craft. Cutting a perfect voussoir requires skill. There's satisfaction in doing difficult work well. Religious belief. Many probably believed they were building for God, that their labour earned spiritual merit, maybe salvation. Community identity. The cathedral was their city's cathedral. They lived in its shadow. Their grandchildren would worship there. It was a legacy. Here's the paradox. We don't remember them, but we remember what they made. The building outlasted them. It outlasted their children, their children's children, their entire civilization. The world they knew, feudalism, the Catholic monopoly on truth, the structure of medieval society, is gone. Notre-Dame remains. Is that fair? Should we care more about the people than the building? Or is the building the people, their collective effort, their embodied knowledge, their answer to the question of what it means to be human? Thought experiment. If Notre-Dame had burned completely, walls collapsed, vaults shattered, rose windows gone, nothing left but rubble, would we have rebuilt it? Yes. The outcry, the donations, the political will were all there. Could we have rebuilt it exactly as it was? Probably not. We'd have blueprints, photographs, laser scans. But the tacit knowledge, the feel of working Lutetia limestone, the intuition about how stones fit together, the carpenter's sense of how oak beams should be joined, that knowledge lives in the hands of craftspeople. When the building disappears, some of that knowledge disappears too. This is what happened after 2019. They had to relearn traditional timber framing. Fewer than 100 charpentiers in France still knew how. They trained others, passing on the knowledge. But it was close. If another generation had passed without anyone needing to cut an oak beam for a cathedral roof, the knowledge might have been lost entirely. What is Notre-Dame? Is it the stones, the specific molecules arranged in a specific pattern? Is it a form the abstract design that could be recreated anywhere with different materials? Is it the history, the fact that these particular stones were laid by particular people at a particular moment? Or is it all of these, inseparable? I don't know. I've thought about this for hours, walking around the cathedral, looking at the stones, and I don't have an answer. I lean toward thinking it's the history, the specificity, the fact that this stone was placed in 1182, that this glass was made in 1250, that these cracks came from the 2019 fire. The building is a physical record of everything that happened to it. Change the stones, and you lose that record. But I also know that's not the whole story, because people who've never been to Paris, who've only seen Notre-Dame in pictures, still care about it. They donated money to rebuild it. They wept when it burned. So there's something about the idea of Notre-Dame, the symbol, that transcends the physical object. Here's what I think, though I can't prove it. Notre-Dame matters because it's one of the last things we have that connects us. Directly, physically, to people who lived and died 850 years ago. We can read about medieval life. We can study it, but we can't touch it. Except here, stand in Notre-Dame. Put your hand on one of those columns, and you're touching stone that a medieval mason touched. You're standing where medieval kings knelt, where revolutionaries raged, where Napoleon crowned himself. where firefighters fought to save the building just a few years ago. All those moments, all those lives, they're layered into the stone. And when we rebuild it, when we cut new oak beams and lay new lead sheets, we're adding our layer to the record. We're saying, this matters. This is worth preserving. Not because it's useful. It's not really. But because it reminds us that we're part of something larger than ourselves. A chain of human effort stretching back centuries and forward into a future we won't see. That's not a scientific answer. I can't measure it or test it. But standing there, in that light surrounded that stone, I believe it. And I think the people who built it, whose names we'll never know, would understand. The last time I visited, after the restoration, I stood in the nave at sunset. Light from the western rose window, rebuilt, cleaned. Its colours more vivid than they'd been in decades, stretched across the floor in geometric patterns. Blues, reds, golds. The same light that's been falling through that window for 800 years. Transformed by the same glass. Some of it, anyway, the medieval panels that survived landing on the same stones. I thought about the masons who laid those stones. I thought about the glaziers who cut that glass. I thought about Viollet-le-Duc climbing scaffolding in the 1850s, trying to save a ruin. I thought about the firefighters in 2019 risking their lives to prevent collapse. I thought about the carpenters who rebuilt the roof, learning forgotten techniques, sweating over oak beams in workshops. All of them, across centuries, building and rebuilding the same structure. Why? Because some things are worth preserving, not because they're perfect. Notre-Dame isn't perfect. It's been altered and damaged and restored so many times it's more patchwork than original. But because they connect us. To the past, to each other. To the idea that human beings can create something that endures, something that says, we were here and we made this, and it was beautiful. And I don't know about you, but I find that hopeful